Welcome back. I'm Stefan Marceau, your host. First, I want to thank everybody that answered the survey. That was very helpful. So one of the things you will notice today is that the episode is a little longer. This was based on feedback that you wanted some longer episodes. Doesn't mean all the future episodes are going to be 30, 35 minutes plus, but I'll try to make them longer. With that, let's get to today's episode. So today we're talking to David Norwell. He's the author of a book called A Complex Coast. A Complex Coast is about a kayak journey from Vancouver Island to Alaska. But it's more than just a physical journey, as you'll see. It is a physical journey. It's also a mental journey and a growth journey.
We have David Norwell today. He wrote the book, A Complex Coast. It's really a travel log that chronicles David's adventurous journey through the coastal waters of the Pacific Northwest. I believe it's from Victoria, BC to Gustavus, Alaska. The book is really rich. It's a travel log, but it's rich with personal reflections, ecological observations, cultural insights, and emphasizing the connection between humans and nature. So I really loved your book. A lot of the drawings, they're very, very fun. And the recipes you have to, not that I would use them, but they're all in there. So I was really drawn. And what inspired you to undertake such an extensive kayak journey from Vancouver Island to Alaska?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction. When we were kids, we had this hamster. It was called Deep Space. And it was just in a glass box. And it would run inside this hamster wheel. It had its food, it had its little bed, it had its hamster wheel.
Right.
And it had everything it needed. And sometimes when I was at university, I was, early 20s, I kind of felt like Deep Space. It was just, I had all the comforts, I had my little routine, but there was definitely something missing. Yeah, I was definitely searching at an early age in different ways, and nature was always held up in our family as kind of, the temple, so to speak. So the place where you could go out and kind of get some answers. And actually, when we were, so Deep Space, back to the hamster.
Yeah.
One day it was completely contained kind of glass cage, but one day it just disappeared.
Oh no.
It just like a Houdini hamster trick or something. And was gone for some days.
Oh no.
Later we found it. It had made its way all the way to the upstairs. Oh. And I always wondered, what made Deep Space want to leave its sanctuary?
Right.
And so I think that's kind of what I did. I just disappeared one day. It was a little more communicative than the hamster, but
the hamster just going away. Yes.
Yeah, I let my family know. And so I think it was just that it is a kind of untranslatable deep feeling when you're kind of in a routine and you feel a bit stuck.
Yeah.
And you're not that you're depressed or super, I wasn't going through too much negativity, although I was kind of struggling in my own ways with mental health. But I just needed some answers. And so I thought, let's kayak up to Bella Bella.
Yes.
That's kind of the halfway point on the coast.
Right.
I was 24 when I first started. So I think I was just looking for answers and I was open. I was just thinking that maybe the ocean could be this powerful.
Did you have any experience kayaking, or you just kind of decided, okay, I'm going to do kayaking. This is what I'm going to do. Is that how?
I had some experience. So I was doing my undergrad at UVic. And the summer before leaving on the big sojourn up to Bella Bella, I had kayak guided for the kids camp.
Oh, nice. Camp
Thunderbird. And that was guiding 14, 15-year-olds from Nanaimo down to Victoria. It was about a 9-day trip. And to do that, I took the AOG course, Assistant Overnight Guide course with the Sea Kayak Guides Alliance of BC.
Okay.
And that's like a 1-week course, and they basically they give you the crash course into everything you need for doing on the water expeditions.
Oh, that's fantastic! Yeah. Way to get into it, right? So
yeah, it was perfect. And I already had camping background from growing up with my family, and then also kind of 4 seasons up in the Yukon doing mineral exploration, living in tents for the entire summer. So I kind of had like a bit of the I guess the camping background and just the survival skills.
Yes.
And then the kayak skills just in that summer cruise.
And you obviously gained some as you started your journey.
That's the benefit of starting in Victoria, because you're going through the Gulf Islands and it's all fairly protected, fairly close to health. And so I could kind of level up. And by the time I got to Port Hardy and had to cross Cape Caution and get into some pretty technical waters, I was feeling comfortable, and I had some experience under my belt.
I forget the details. Did you buy a kayak or build one, or what did you do?
I bought one. Yeah, I think I was really broke at the time. So
Okay.
I was looking on Craigslist for boats, and I was trying to borrow anything, right? I was this fairly poor student at the time. And my old professor from UVic was selling his boat, but it was quite a high price. So I baked him banana bread, and I lowballed him and told him what I was going to do, that I was going to go off and do marine biology research with the kayak. And he's like, okay.
Nice story.
I gave him a copy of the book and met up with him a couple months ago.
Afterwards.
It was just amazing. Yeah. He was so enthralled. He's a environmental restoration.
Tell me about your kayak journey and your challenges, your good moments, and how you approach those challenges.
It's quite demanding to kayak up the coast. And so it's 1,700 kilometers in total.
Mm-hmm.
And you get all the different types of weather. You get all the different types of geography. I think the biggest struggle, to be honest, that comes to mind as far as challenges was mental health. I mean, being alone for that long out on the water, you kind of have to face your demons in a way. And they come up in the most unexpected times, and they kind of compound the really rough times. So I remember even in the first couple weeks, kind of having a day where I had to make a crossing to Savory Island. And the place where I was supposed to camp was called Vivian Rock, and it's just covered in sea lions. They're barking like mad. And I thought, there's no way I'm camping on this little island. There's no place to camp. And so I make this crossing to Savory Island, and it was already getting dark, and it starts getting darker and darker, and it's about 6 miles. So by the time I was getting close to the island, it's completely dark, and the wind kicked up. There's white caps kind of soaking over my stern. Right. And then all of a sudden I end up in this reef system, and there's crashing waves that I can't even see on these reefs. And eventually I kind of slog up onto the beach, carry everything up, set up the tent backwards. And at this point, you're frustrated, you're tired, and at the same time, you're kind of just lucky to be alive. And, and so it's kind of like those moments of vulnerability create these moments of kind of insight and beauty and profound kind of, encounters with your own capacity. Your whole experience is kind of going up and down and up and down, and it's slowly pushing the boundaries of who you are and what you think you can do, and also like your emotional capacity. So I think it's a good curriculum. As soon as you step out the door, as soon as you're on the journey, that's when you can start kind of healing yourself and start really assessing just what type of life you were living back home, and if it was really what you wanted.
I guess it's not for everybody, but I think can anybody do this? What do you think?
I think with some steps, it's possible.
It's possible.
There's kind of a couple ingredients, I would say. I think you need the appropriate training. Like in the back of the book, I have resources and some ideas around what people might need to do trips like this. You also need the inspiration, and you need the kind of the motivation to do it. But I mean, I think people can start small. I was just fairly dense,
You went all in.
I went all in, and I needed a kind of a hard mentorship, a kind of a rough teacher, so to speak. But I think, in people's own backyards, there's so much. Like you just need to take that step out the door.
And just do it. And you also talk a lot about your connection with nature throughout the journey. Emphasize this connection between humans and nature. Can you elaborate how this evolved during your travels?
Yeah, I remember somewhere in southeast Alaska, it was just north of Ketchikan, and I was crossing It's a pretty big crossing, about maybe 10 miles or something. So it takes, in a kayak, 10 miles, that's taking about, I don't know, 5-6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm at nearing the end of this crossing, and I see some humpbacks, and they're coming up, feeding a little bit. And they're maybe a kilometer away or so, and I get closer and closer, and one humpback just starts surfacing right beside the boat, within meters. I can see its big blowhole opening.
Wow.
And the barnacles covering the body.
Wow.
I'm just gasping for air. And you just have this profound moment. Like, here's this huge whale with a brain comparable, if not surpassing our own.
Right.
And it was like it was saying hello. And then it dives down. I see its tail come up. So that means it's going for a deep dive. And I'm just, basking in my awe for a moment. Mm-hmm. And then about 2 minutes later, it just comes straight up from the surface about 20 meters away.
Wow.
Half breaches, smashes down in the water. There's a huge explosion. I just remember the spray and the wave, and then the ripples and the sound, and just kind of rocking in the boat afterwards. And it was just quiet.
Wow.
And I was just paralyzed with this amazing feeling of humility, feeling small, feeling connected, feeling like there is intelligence that is just totally comparable to our own. And it's just, it just happens to be swimming right beside me. And all living creatures, they have their own kind of profound intelligence. And when you're out there and you start slowing down, and your need for stimulation is you go through whatever that withdrawal process, you can really start tuning in a bit and making those connections. And so, yeah, I think there's something really neat about doing long solo expeditions, and especially in marine environments, because you're so close to the water, and because you have the whole marine mammal family, which is really just so amazing.
And you do a lot of, I don't know if you painted before watercoloring, or is that something you picked up along the way? And it's very expressive, and I guess it influenced your storytelling and added to your storytelling. Did you use that in your journey as a connection?
Yeah, I mean, so for your listeners, the book has about 700 different watercolors in it, and they're all kind of translated and out of the 2 journals I had during the expedition. Mm-hmm. So during the trip, I was kayaking up, and I had these 2 big black journals, and every night, get in the tent. Yeah, I'd write about the day. I'd write about what I saw, the different species, because I also had 3 guidebooks. I had a plants book. It's called Whelks to Whales, which is got all your marine life, and then a fungus book. So I had 3 kingdoms. And I was just trying to ID whatever I could find, whatever was making an impression on me. Mm-hmm. And so I was painting it. So the watercolors and the art was just a way to translate all these things that I couldn't really describe with words. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that had always been, not always, but that was increasingly becoming my coping mechanism, if you will, or my express myself and interpret the world. And yeah, so these 2 black journals ended up filling up all, and by the end of it, they looked like some captain's log with like tea stains and ripped and burnt edges, and they got soaked a couple times. And When I started showing people these journals when I got back home, people would open them up. You could just, the authenticity or the feeling of that adventure and those experiences I had. You could feel it. They really made an you could feel it. And the people who were reading it, they look up at me and they just weren't disbelieving it. You made this? Like, what is this? And that's kind of how I started getting the inspiration to actually write a book about it and translate it into something a little more digestible. And something that can go out into the bookstores.
It's very immersive. So that's fantastic. So what inspired you to write a book? People told you about it, and how has it been received? I mean, it's pretty recent. I think your book a year old. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the book's been out for a year.
Right.
And it's doing really well. It's been surprisingly well received. And yeah, that writing process. So after I did the trips, which is like 2014, 2016. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this is almost almost 10 years later.
I know.
So the writing and the art, it took about 6 or 7 years to kind of compile it. And I kind of came up with a first draft, and then each year, after that, I'd come back to it. I was thinking about self-publishing it first. And then eventually I realized that's not what I want to do at all.
Really?
Because I want to write more books or do more adventures rather than turn into a bookseller. And so, once it all came together and once it got out, I think people are really craving authenticity right now.
It's very authentic, absolutely.
Yeah, there's kind of a bit of a gap in our connection with nature as we get increasingly more dependent on technology. And so once it came out, it got shortlisted in the Banff Mountain Book Awards, and then there's another award it's nominated for right now, which is the BC Yukon Book Awards.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and actually the best, the thing I enjoy the most is getting messages from people who have been kayaking up on the coast and brought the book.
Yes.
And were reading it while they're out on the water. It was helping them identify seaweeds or kind of other wild edibles. And then they messaged me, and that just is amazing. It's really amazing.
And your book, I think that your book is trying to contribute to the conversation about environmental conservation, the importance of probably protecting the Pacific Northwest, but protecting all environment, but specifically, I guess, the Pacific Northwest, right? So
that's a big it's a big topic in a lot of ways. The Pacific Northwest is just this incredibly vast, incredibly complex, incredibly beautiful, but also really remote, really hard to monitor and also enforce environmental regulations. And it's also really rich in resources. So it's kind of a medley of all these different vested interests. And when I was paddling up in 2016, I remember there was 3 or 4 different proposed export facilities just south of Prince Rupert, including the, basically LNG project looking to export natural gas. And then there was potash and a bunch of other of these facilities all being proposed, like right in the mouth of the Skeena River, which is where all these salmon are basically spending weeks to osmoregulate and change so they can turn it into freshwater fish or when they convert it to saltwater fish. And so that kind of intersection between resource extraction, connection with nature, and the communities that live there, and all the natural creatures, it's really messy. And the more stories we have from the coast, the more we can kind of get people to understand what's at stake and just what's going on. Because I think that's the big thing. Is like you look on the map and you have Vancouver Island, and Vancouver, and it's like, oh yeah, I know that area. And then you have about almost 700 or 800 kilometers, and then you have Prince Rupert, and everything in between it's about 25 or 30,000 islands, and there's only 2 or 3 communities, most of them small indigenous communities that are starting to have a lot more say and having really neat resource management programs. So I think that's the most exciting thing, is just realizing that that whole coastline has been inhabited for the last 16,000 years since time immemorial. So it's like there is management systems in place. There's all sorts of really cool stewardship, and I think we just have to slow down sometimes. And that's starting to happen.
Yeah, I love how you reflect a lot on the importance of the indigenous knowledge and the stewardship of the land. And you talk about acknowledging the territories that you traverse and all that. Do you want to talk to me about the people that you've met that are interspersed, not the city people, but everywhere in these distances, and what the influence they've had on you?
Yeah, the people who live on the coast of British Columbia and Southeast Alaska are like no one else. They are so humble and so embedded in the ecosystem that sometimes you just, like, I was consistently being humbled whenever I meet communities up there, because you kind of have to check yourself and check all your perspectives at the door, because they just see the world differently. I remember I was very privileged to spend a lot of time in Bella Bella with the Haudenosaunee First Nation, and helping with that. They have a camp just in the Quay River watershed. and I was able to kind of help do a bit of carpentry there. And every day we'd be out, either getting salmon or crabs from the watershed. And just so in touch with everything that's happening in the natural systems around, and then using that as and having all these things as food sources, it just changes how you see and how you feel the world around you. And then even some of the, the settlers who have kind of ended up living there, they're also really interesting stories, because usually they've gone up there to in some way exploit the landscape as fish or timber, and then they kind of get stuck, or they start getting embedded into the very ecosystem which they came to exploit, and now they're living there for the last 20, 30 years. I met one guy named Kayak Kelly. It's a pretty amazing story. So this is in Southeast Alaska, and I'm in a very remote part that's basically only accessible by kayak, and I was looking to fish for some coho, and all of a sudden another kayak comes into view, and it's this old grizzly-looking guy, and he's got a gaff hook on the back of his boat. He's got a shotgun with him, and he's been living out in Southeast Alaska out of his kayak, just camping for the last 6 to 10 years. And he had got fed up with nursing in the lower 48 states, and he just came up there for refuge. And I got to spend a couple nights with this guy. And also on that, where we were fishing, within 15 minutes, he had 2 coho on his deck, gutted and ready to go. And I had found nothing. I'm not very good fisherman. And just talking with him and hearing his stories, it made me realize, like, I was just up there for a little tourist trip, basically, compared to some of these people who end up spending their whole lives in this ecosystem. And so that was pretty nice to kind of record his experience and tell his story. And same with the Health of First Nation. Just I'm so honored to meet these people and to be able to share a bit of it in the book.
Has it changed your eating habits too?
My eating habits? Now I think I'm quite different. But during the trip, I was wild harvesting a lot of my food. That was also part of the trip. Where the intention was, how can I get in touch with some of these different food systems?
That's kind of what I mean. I mean changing habit. Like I meant, so I know you were foraging and trying to find. Did you bring that back home now, or a little bit? Or it's harder to do, right?
Just yesterday, I went out picking Saskatoons for 2 hours with my mom. And this morning I was just out harvesting mushrooms. I was finding some rasulas and boletes. So, I mean, one thing it's done is made me realize that spending that extra time to go out and look for your own food, especially wild food, sometimes you don't find much. Sometimes you find a lot, actually, especially once you get more adept at it. But it just changes everything. We make this big Saskatoon crisp last night, and it just made you could feel the sustenance, and then you had a relationship to that food source in a totally different way than when we go to the store.
Do you want to talk about love? Because it's quite a bit in your book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was 24 years old, and I was just going.
I know it's 8 years ago, and so on. You have some good quotes about that too. But
it's a great
that's
topic.
Also part of your growth, right? So
yeah, and I think when you're young and you're in your 20s, it's on your mind. Like it's part of the whole trip was a coming of age story, and it was a coming of age journey for me, learning how to be myself, basically. And at the time, I had a really wonderful partner, and we were just trying to work it out. How do we come together? And I kept having these deep motivations to be by myself, to go out and do trips like I did. And so trying to bring those two parts of myself together, the part that really wants company and the part that wants to be alone and explore and be a bit, unaccountable. That's some deep human thing.
Yeah, it is a human thing, and it's also part of solitude, right? Aching for some comfort too, right? So you also did some sailing with the kayak, so you can probably compare the two mode of transportation, which are similar in the sense that you're not moving very fast, but it's different world for sure.
Right. Yeah, so I had kayaked that coast from Victoria to Bella Bella, And then also Kaya and I had sailed, it's a 25-foot CNC.
Yeah.
So a small sailboat. And we had done it without the motor. That was our challenge, to sail the whole way. So anchoring and
real sailing.
Yeah, real sailing. And that was kind of and we had two 17-foot oars that we attached to the boat that we had taken from the Uvic Rowing Club. They are very different. Kayaking, you have access to places that no one else does on the coast. Because I can go in with the kayak and land in some little beach on the side of an island, and no one else could ever get there, because it's just, you just can't have that with a keel boat or even a Hobie Cat or even, anyways. So I think access is the big one. And and you definitely have some comforts when you have the big sailboat, though.
Of course.
And so that's the trade-off.
You did sail the kayak, so tell us about that. Actually, there's a big following everywhere about canoe sailing and kayak sailing. So that seems to be getting a little bit bigger, or maybe it's more because on Facebook you'd see it more now. You didn't really hear about that before, and so you've tried that, and obviously you tell us about that.
Sure. So I ended up sailing about 20 or 25% of the journey. And
was that right? I didn't realize it was that much.
The reason I kind of got started with it, I was doing a big crossing from Princess Royal Island to Kempania Island. And I was about halfway through the crossing, and I just developed this really intense shoulder pain, some chronic rubbing of the muscles, and I literally couldn't keep paddling. And the wind started to kick up, and it's exposed to Hecate Strait, so it's quite a dangerous piece of water, actually. And luckily, the wind started veering and started pushing from behind, and I was sitting on this big 8-foot by 6-foot tarp. I just had that in my pocket, so I just took that out, jimmy rigged it to my paddle, and I started sailing, and I made the fastest time I ever went. I was going 6 knots at one point, surfing down the Whitecaps. Wow. And so when I got to shore, I thought, okay, maybe this is the solution. And I had these old blueprints that another kayaker had given me. And so I attached these 2 8-foot pieces of cedar just in front of my cockpit to the D. There's these little D rings where your deck webbing is attached. So I clove hitched 2 big pieces of cedar in an A-frame, and then it would come up and down on a pulley system, so I could put it down when I wasn't sailing, and it would just rest on the bow, and then I could kind of string it up, and it would come vertical. And then from there, I would raise a square-rigged sail with that 8-foot piece of tarp. And it would kind of pull up on halyard, and I could kind of adjust the sail size accordingly. And from there, I'd have the 4 corners attached by ropes to my paddle. So it was kind of like a kiteboard in a way. And I could really get groovy with it. It was immensely dangerous as far as sailing. Like if you look at the most sailing setups, there's just basically a small little sail, a little small triangle on the front. And
most of them I see on a kayak is a small triangle. So you're doing a square sail,
square rig sail, And I would have all sorts of kind of dagger board setups, and you take on a bit of extra weight. But I ended up flipping about 5 or 6 times with this setup, because as soon as I'd get a big gust, sometimes I'd get the corner of the sail would catch the water, and then I would just get sucked in. And of course, I can't roll because I've got so much weight, water resistance. And so I'd have to wet exit, cut out all the lines, and figure out all the rigging, and then re-enter and get to shore and drive it out. It was a real debacle, but I got better and better, and by the end of it, I could really use the wind to advantage.
What are your future plans?
Yeah,
more adventures?
Last month I was able to do a circumnavigation of Nootka Island, which is a pretty remote island on the west coast of Vancouver Island.
Kayaking as well. And and that was kind of a little dream trip. And then the other trip I'd really like to do is the Stickeen River, which is about 3/4 of the way up in British Columbia, and it comes out around Wrangell in southeast Alaska. So it's be just amazing. Like you can paddle down the river and then hop out on these little lakes, which are basically glacier lakes. So the glacier is coming right down to the water. So that's as far as paddling, that's what I like to do. But one thing I'm trying to do more of is just
support the community. And there's a really neat organization called BC Marine Trails. I'd like to get more involved with them. And right now, one fun thing that we might try to get together is making kind of a bucket list for kayakers. So kind of like a list of qualifying tours and circumnavigations that people can, kind of have on their radar. And, you know, if they complete them all, maybe they get a little star beside their name or something. But
that sounds like a great idea, a fun idea.
Yeah, something to get people out there and engaged in different terrain, and that's what I'd like to do. I've learned so much from kayaking up the coast. If a couple other people can get involved, that's good.
Well, that was good. Now, on to our next episode, which is with Andrew Bedwell. You'll find out that Andrew is the man behind the Big Sea Challenge. What is the Big Sea Challenge? Well, it's a pretty serious challenge. He wants to cross the Atlantic. He wants to actually set the record crossing the Atlantic in the smallest boat. So you'll find out all the details about his first trial, his build of his new boat, and his next attempt. You can find the NanoCruising podcast on all your regular podcast provider, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. So please subscribe, leave us a comment. You can also join our Facebook group where you can continue the conversation. Also, if you want to keep up to date, join our mailing list to make sure you keep up with all the latest episodes. Until next time, seize your own adventure.